Well, let's stay with that. I'm joined by Michal Kotler-Wunsch, a former MP in the Israeli Knesset. Thank you so much for joining us on BBC World News, Michal. Let me ask you, first of all, your reaction to the ceasefire.
So, I would more refer to it as a fragile truce. A fragile truce, because the word ceasefire insinuates that we have long-term hopes for this ceasefire. And I remind us that it is a ceasefire between Israel, a law-abiding state, and Hamas, a genocidal terror organization, committing a double war crime, targeting Israeli children with 4,300 rockets from amidst very densely populated areas in Gaza, compromising and using Gazan children as human shields. And so the word ceasefire with a genocidal terror organization is one that we don't hold great expectations for.
Okay, some would argue that Israeli rockets also killed many Palestinian people. Israeli rockets targeted Hamas, but they weren't as precise as the Israelis made out they were. A lot of people died, innocent people in Gaza and the surrounding area. And some would also argue that Israel, perhaps, if they want to guarantee a ceasefire, could look at the root causes of the problems, which predate Hamas, don't they?
Oh, well, they certainly predate Hamas, a genocidal terror organization hell-bent on the annihilation of the state of Israel in their charter. So there is no acceptance of the legitimacy of the state of Israel to exist. And I would argue that if we hope for, and we do, for peace with Palestinians, those very Palestinians now held hostage, 2 million Gazans held hostage by a genocidal terror organization, actually recognized as a terror organization in countries, I believe, including England, certainly the United States and Canada, and so forth. We have to be very clear on the moral equivalency and the falsehood that it creates, because with terror that actually utilizes its own citizens as human shields, actually in violation of international law, not calling them on it, not only enables but empowers the culture of impunity of not only this specific terror organization, but of terror regimes worldwide that threaten the very fabric of democracy.
One would argue, though, that it's the people of Gaza who felt terrorized. It's the journalists who worked in their own building, whose building got destroyed, who felt terrorized.
Yeah, so utilizing a building in which journalists actually perform their most important and sacred duty to report what is happening on the ground, much like utilizing hospitals and schools and homes and constructing actually miles and miles of terror tunnels below residential areas, with the millions of humanitarian aid diverted to terror, and actually targeting, as I said, Israeli civilians with more than 4,300 rockets that have been diverted. You are right, because the state of Israel, in defense, its actually right and responsibility to defend its citizens, and civilians, has actually created what we know of as the Iron Dome, which intercepts those rockets. But that is not for a moment, I would say, exculpating of the genocidal terror organization. And I would say that for a durable ceasefire, and just to finish with that, because you asked me about a ceasefire, for a durable ceasefire to actually end the unacceptable cycle of violence and the tremendous loss of civilian life on both sides of the border, there has to be a holding to account of what we understand to be a genocidal terror organization,
Michal,
by its own admission.
Let me ask you about the political situation, because you've aligned yourself to Benny Gantz. What's happened now, the 11 days of fighting, the ceasefire, whatever you want to call it, they have really politically energized Benjamin Netanyahu, haven't they?
So, as you know, I did not actually excuse myself from running in the last elections. And in fact, I did in the past belong to Benny Gantz's party. Look, we are in a political process that's very, very complicated. There are several possibilities for a coalition government being constructed, and I very much hope that we don't head into a fifth election in this political disarray. There are, in fact, discussions of a possible coalition agreement, and we will know in the coming days, in the next 12 days, in fact, if the current leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, manages to construct such a coalition. But I want to be very clear, regardless of the political, I would say, struggles that the state of Israel is having internal, it is unequivocally and across the board clear to all those that are currently in opposition or coalition, that in order to create long-lasting, sustainable peace with the Palestinians, much like the prospective Abraham Accords enabled in terms of recognition, negotiation, and peace. In order to be able to do that with the Palestinians, we need the world's understanding and international assistance and aid to be conditioned upon not diverting all of that tremendous, incredible aid to terror tunnels. As I said, millions of aid that were actually diverted from helping people on the ground, from schools, from education. We need the international community to ensure that the education materials, the curriculum, does not include hate and incitement towards the one single Jewish country in the world.
Michal Kotler-Wunsch, thank you. I really appreciate you answering my question, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.